What happens when the world's largest economy targets not just rivals, but also allies and emerging partners? The answer may redefine the global order for decades to come. Welcome to TVAI, where global events meet sharp analysis. As the dust settles from a dramatic White House press conference, the world finds itself grappling with a bold and controversial economic maneuver by former President Donald Trump. In a bid to rebalance global trade, Trump unveiled a color-coded chart marking dozens of countries to be hit with the latest wave of U.S. tariffs. While China remains a prime target, the new list includes unexpected entries like Mexico, India, Brazil, and even longtime allies such as Germany and South Korea. The announcement has set off alarm bells not just in boardrooms and stock exchanges, but also in presidential palaces and foreign ministries across the globe. While the U.S. gears up for what it calls a necessary correction to decades of unfair trade, nations around the world are preparing to retaliate or realign. Let's explore how this aggressive trade move is perceived beyond U.S. borders, and why it might be the spark that ignites a global reshuffle in economic alliances. Mexico, America's next-door neighbor and one of its largest trading partners, was among the most vocal in its opposition. President Claudia Sheinbaum issued a firm statement from the Palacio Nacional, calling the new tariffs a direct threat to economic stability in North America. The proposed 20% levy on Mexican exports, including cars, agricultural products, and electronics, could potentially upend the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, the very framework that governs trilateral trade in the region. This is not just about numbers on a chart, said President Sheinbaum. It's about jobs, cooperation, and decades of integration between our economies. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi also addressed the issue in a rare emergency parliamentary session. India is slated to face a 25% tariff on pharmaceuticals, textiles, and IT services. Modi warned that the tariffs could destabilize the Indian economy just as it begins to recover from inflationary shocks and a fluctuating rupee. If the U.S. seeks to isolate itself, India will look east and south. Our partnerships with ASEAN, the African Union, and Latin America are ripe for expansion, Modi declared. This sentiment is being echoed throughout the developing world. Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, and South Africa are all exploring alternative trade routes and regional agreements that could insulate them from future tariff shocks. The multipolar world is not a theory, it is now a necessity, stated South Africa's Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. If the West reverts to protectionism, the Global South will look inward and cooperate. From an economic standpoint, analysts warn that the tariffs could lead to a fragmentation of the global supply chain. Many multinationals that previously centralized production for efficiency are now considering regional hubs to avoid being caught in political crossfire. This shift is particularly significant in sectors like automotive, pharmaceuticals, and consumer electronics. In Mumbai, executives from Tata Consultancy Services held closed-door meetings with government officials to discuss how to navigate the tariff barriers. In Monterrey, Mexico, factories that manufacture everything from refrigerators to fiber-optic cables are assessing whether operations will be scaled back or moved to tariff-free zones. The European Union, while not as directly impacted, has called for an emergency session at the World Trade Organization. EU Trade Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis issued a carefully worded statement. We urge the United States to engage in dialogue rather than unilateral action. Global challenges require multilateral solutions. But the multilateral system may be on shaky ground. Trump's tariffs, dubbed the Color Code Doctrine by media outlets, categorize nations into red, yellow, and green zones. Red nations face steep tariffs over 25%, yellow between 10 to 20%, and green under 5% or exempt. Critics say this method reduces complex trade relationships into oversimplified, politically driven decisions. In response, countries in the red zone are already coordinating their countermeasures. India and Mexico have proposed a Global Fair Trade Alliance, GFTA, an economic bloc designed to reduce reliance on U.S. imports and prioritize regional trade networks. Meanwhile, American companies are caught in the middle. Ford Motor Company, which operates several plants in Mexico, warned that higher import costs would either raise car prices for U.S. consumers or force layoffs in Mexican factories. Pharmaceutical giants like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson expressed concern that tariff hikes on Indian imports could delay critical medical supplies. U.S. farmers, too, are uneasy. Despite being based in a red state stronghold, soybean and corn growers in Iowa and Nebraska fear that retaliatory tariffs from China and India could lock them out of billion-dollar markets. The political fallout in Washington is already intense. Democrats accuse Trump of isolating the U.S. and provoking allies. Meanwhile, Trump supporters hail the move as a bold stand for American sovereignty. "We're taking back control," Trump declared at the end of his press conference, holding up the now viral chart. "This is not just a trade reset. It's a national reset." Only time will tell whether the reset brings about resurgence or rupture. Across the globe, however, the message is clear. Countries are no longer waiting for Washington's next move. They're making their own. As global power dynamics shift, the implications of Trump's tariff gambit are only beginning to unfold. Even nations not directly listed in the chart are watching closely. Australia and Canada, though placed in the green category, are re-evaluating their reliance on U.S. markets. Canadian Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland noted that green today does not mean safe tomorrow, warning that policy unpredictability may prompt Ottawa to diversify trade ties toward Asia and Europe. Japan and South Korea, both key U.S. allies, find themselves in a strategic dilemma. With tariffs hovering in the yellow zone, their industries, particularly tech and automotive, are facing cost hikes and logistical headaches. Tokyo's foreign minister proposed a trilateral summit with Seoul and Canberra to discuss coordinated responses and joint investments in Southeast Asia as a buffer. Meanwhile, China is playing the long game. With a strategic focus on the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing is extending trade lifelines to nations feeling cornered by the new U.S. tariffs. While not engaging in a direct tariff tit-for-tat just yet, Chinese state media have described Trump's strategy as economic siege warfare, a phrase that has already trended across Chinese social platforms. Financial markets are oscillating in response to every new development. The Dow Jones and S&P 500 posted their largest intraday drops in months after the tariff chart's unveiling. Emerging market currencies also took a hit, with the Indian rupee and Mexican peso depreciating significantly. Yet amid the uncertainty, some sectors are identifying opportunity. Southeast Asian nations like Malaysia and Thailand are eyeing relocation of manufacturing hubs from tariff-affected countries. The Philippines has launched a trade mission targeting companies looking to exit China and India in search of more stable alternatives. Subscribe now to stay informed on the stories shaping tomorrow.